A reading before the sermon. This is from the Reverend Dr. Sherry Prudhomme, who was asked to write theological reflections on each of our new UU shared values. This is what she writes about love. Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. The great universalist heresy, the one that so threatened evangelical and Calvinist groups in New England in the late 18th and early 19th century, that they vehemently opposed it, denying universalist preachers access to their pulpits and to positions of public power, was that the nature of God is love. This love embedded in the fabric of the universe was strong, nurturing, and inclusive. It would not let go of anyone ever. Grounded in that love, universalists rejected any idea of an afterlife that ultimately separated humankind into the saved and the damned. They rejected the violence and cruelty inherent in traditional notions of atonement, which understood God as having ordained Jesus to suffer and die on behalf of humanity. Instead, with salvation as a given, the locus of religiosity became this world rather than the next among these people. The Universalist focused on the process of living as one of coming into greater alignment with love as a response to the unshakable foundation of knowing one was already completely held in love. Following a similar thread, the early Unitarians in the 19th century New England held an understanding of religious life as one of growing the soul towards likeness of God, whom they also understood as loving. They understood love as one of the capacities of the soul inherent in every human being. They did not suggest their parishioners should remove themselves from society in lives of contemplation and prayer, but rather that they unfold the divine likeness within themselves through the daily activities of living. Through the years, Unitarian Universalists have broadened and, in some case, released notions of God or the divine in religious life. We have troubled the imperialism toward which Universalism leans. We have embraced ever-widening understandings of who is included in the divine likeness. We have deepened our critiques of images of God that condone patriarchy, white supremacy, ableism, and violence. But we have held fast to love. We affirm the power of love to heal what is broken, to hold us together across pluralities of diverse religious practices and beliefs, to hold us when things fall apart, to grow our capacities, and to guide us as we return again and again in our families and communities to side with love. So today's service was supposed to be about stewardship, and that's not really what came out, because good grief, this world, and by this world, I mean this country. So my stewardship message, please give generously. It is deeply appreciated. This is only possible because of you. So thank you. Stewardship. To a crowded room with more than 3,000 in attendance, the Reverend Theodore Parker delivered what is still considered one of the most important sermons in Unitarian and Universalist history, titled The Transient and the Permanent in Christianity for a Colleague's Ordination. In it, Reverend Parker, whose words were immortalized 100 years later by MLK Jr. with "The arc of the moral universe is long," argued that there are two aspects of Christianity: the doctrines, the rituals, even the people and the ministers, which change and transform over time, and then the pure essence of our faith, which is God and his expression through Jesus Christ. It was a provocative argument for the time, and Parker was denounced as an infidel among Unitarians. Denounced as an infidel, and likely other things of more color, which I should not repeat from the pulpit, leading him to leave the Unitarian Church. His spirit has never really left our congregations, though, and has been reclaimed by us fiercely. The transient and the permanent may overlap, and for what is transient, we certainly hope that it would overlap some with the permanent, but there is always some distinction between the two. Sometimes it is that they are not synced. Sometimes it is simply that the transient is always the interpretation, the attempt to express or convey the ideas of the permanent. Sometimes the transient is simply what doesn't work or isn't useful anymore. For us, over time, this has manifested in leaving more conservative theology and even moving away from God-centric to God-inclusive beliefs, while remaining bound in congregational polity and covenant through these changes. God's essence may stay the same, but our ideas about what that is or means, looks like, and how it manifests in this world change. Of course, the irony, I suppose, is that even when what Parker believed to be permanent, the so-called pure essence of the faith, has changed in the less than 200 years since Parker preached this sermon. For example, we have come to view that the permanent is, in fact, the community, the covenant, and the ways we journey together. Of course, some of this change had to do with the merging of the two faiths 120 years after Parker delivered his sermon. Both parts have grown together and changed together as we have challenged ourselves to live more fully into our beliefs and widening the circle of who we mean when we say we, as well as letting go of the beliefs that no longer serve us or the beloved community we aspire to co-create. If we look at our story, The More You Give, through Parker's lens, the transient is first the people, the rituals, the wisdom, and the love they share, and the seeds that are planted, which are passed down through generations. Because they are being passed down, they then become considered part of the permanent. But what we discover at the end of the story is that the permanent is, in fact, no longer just the rituals or the wisdom or the seeds, but the love and the life cared for by the generations that is passed through from one to the next. Congregations and faiths and families are different in what can be passed down in some ways, but are similar in others. We in church may not be passing down a love of planting acorns and making pancakes, but we do pass down love and rituals and covenants and buildings and other things that we trust those who are to come will keep or not, if it serves them. What we have to give is as important as how we give it, and to acknowledge that we, in this moment, are both creating the conditions for the future and living into it. Depending on who you asked, which feels like one of the most you phrases ever, people were delighted or really not delighted by the new values that were lifted up for our members to reflect on by the Article 2 Study Commission. Longtime UU staff found it surprising when people were surprised because over the last generation and change, these values have consistently been what we have expressed as being most important to us. Our new values, which have replaced our previous 7 principles in the UUA bylaws under Article 2, were passed by an 80% majority by a Democratic vote of delegates at our 2024 General Assembly. The new values are justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity, all founded on a liberating love. This love that has been handed down to us through generations precedes and succeeds all other aspects of our faith and the way we live it. It is our permanent. Our theology over several hundred years has changed in form and content, but 2 of 3 gifts that were given to us by our ancestors to nurture and tender as we saw fit is covenant and congregational polity. There are times, I know, when our congregational polity may not seem like a gift. It can be very slow, doesn't give us answers, and can drag on for some time, sometimes feeling longer than necessary. Congregational polity for us comes from all the way back to the Pilgrims and the Puritans. Having made it to this country's shores, they wanted to find a way to worship together, but this may sound familiar. They all had different ideas about what that should mean and look like. And so they began having conversations in homes, hosting each other week after week for years. That relational aspect of our faith has been sewn in from the beginning. It was another time, and maybe for us, life seemed like it would have been slow then, and that they had more time for the many, many, many conversations. But the truth is in part that what they valued was the relationship and the desire to come to true consensus in order to meet their various needs. They intentionally were leaving places where they were told what to do by others in many parts of their lives, including government, work, and church. They were searching for a greater freedom to choose. That's the third gift given to us by our ancestors. The term heretic traces all the way back to the Greek and means able to choose. This was probably one of their core values, and one that I believe that we continue to give many thanks for. While slow conversations in our age of fast-paced news cycles and many other kinds of processing may seem onerous and annoying, it can be helpful for us to slow down and reflect on what matters most to us as we work our way forward together. Big and important decisions are not meant to be made lightly. I realize that perhaps not everyone will see love, that liberating love that we are hoping to live into in this process of conversational decision-making, but I do. I see the tenderness of wanting to be in right relationship, of wanting to get it right, and recognizing that when it fails, when it fails, we will find our way back to each other. I see love in the relationships, even the most challenging ones, a recognition of our inherent worth and dignity, even at our most frustrating. In moments when it seems especially slow going, maybe we take a moment to think about how all our lives might be different if we had taken some more time to understand one another, to practice compassion, to be curious, to be generous. While the Puritans and Pilgrims were theists through and through, what I also see in this whole experiment that they started is the way it values each person. In church hierarchies, we can see how authority comes from the top down and might interpret that as God's will. But here, there is a holding of something different and more, the human element, the elimination of the hierarchy, which allows for equality, the part that we are meant to be present with as we seek to make the beloved kingdom and our attempts at tikkun olam, the healing of the world. I've always had a great appreciation for this. I'm not sure that this is a direct thread into our theological roots, but I can hear it in John Murray's belief in the late 1700s that if we are to spend eternity with our loved ones and neighbors, it would make sense to begin practicing treating each other well now. As if we are striving to live just a little bit more into God's perfect love. Love is an inherently relational enterprise. Sure, we can and should practice self-love, but this cannot be all there is. Perhaps if we humans were not wired down to the marrow of our bones and the electrical pulses that keep our very hearts beating, if we were not wired for connection with one another, perhaps love could be not relational. But we are, and so too it must be. As the Reverend Adam Robersmith writes in his chapter of Love at the Center, My understanding of religious community is centered in a love that must be shared to exist and grow, is powerful through relatedness, and sustains individuals while drawing them into community. The love we have been given by our ancestors expands when we gather, when we share, when we struggle, when we are together. Of course, other faiths do believe similar things, but usually in relationship to a faith in God and Jesus Christ or other deities. But in some ways, the practice of our faith from the beginning has been in our relationships with one another, even to the point that for us today, that is our primary focus, with the belief in a deity or deities or not is probably not even of secondary importance for us. Instead, it's our faith in an abiding love, a love beyond belief or the ability of our human minds to understand its greatness and infinitude that holds us even as we hold each other. And so where does this leave us now? The world feels overwhelming, but remember that we have power. If you only remember one thing, do not forget that. Perhaps let us take a moment to reflect on how our faith has grown with transcendentalism, humanism, Judaism, paganism, atheism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, and more, becoming so rich through our pluralism. Let us reflect on what our faith has survived, including when we were on both sides of the issues, which was pretty much probably always. Land stolen from indigenous peoples, colonies, Revolutionary War, the birth of a nation, its long-time expansion, Civil War, the enslavement period, Jim Crow, 2 world wars, multiple other wars, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, 46 presidencies so far, being closeted, AIDS, eugenics and institutionalization of disabled people, mass incarceration, the war on drugs turned industry of drugs, and so much more. There's a reason Story People wrote, "Anyone can slay a dragon," she told me, "but try waking up every morning and loving the world all over again. That's what takes a real hero." Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt, in her prelude to Love at the Center, writes, "A common question that you often face is how we can be a religion if we do not lay claim to one clearly delineated theological truth. The answer is love. Our inherited theological tradition places its faith in love. Given everything our world faces today, having faith in love is no small thing." At least every generation is asked to confront some major issue, and I won't lie, I think we deserve a rest right now because we've confronted more than our fair share. But it doesn't stop just because we want it to. In fact, right now, that is part of the strategy, overwhelm that will leave us feeling unable to keep on fighting. But this is part of that legacy of love that we have inherited from our ancestors, a belief that love demands justice, or as Cornel West says, that justice is what love looks like in public. The present, but also the future, will ask us how people of faith responded to this moment. How have we resisted what has been chosen for us? Perhaps we can be like the Right Reverend Marian Edgar Buddy, who called for a unity not by religious or political or other belief, but by respect and mutual care, with the current president right in the front row. She spoke of the need for unity to be founded on the honoring of the inherent worth and dignity, oh, it was so sweet to hear those words, of every human being, on honesty and on humility, She also made a plea for mercy for those who are most at risk today because of the orders and promises our current president has made about bans and deportations. But not all of us have access to such a pulpit at such a time. And still, we do have power because of this congregation and this faith and our own daily lives to do something. One of the ways this administration will continue to diminish the diversity, beauty, and strength of this country and all that it holds is to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion education, which includes all marginalized groups and people. So we will continue to support Black, Indigenous, and other people of color with financial resources and awareness, including storytelling and education, as well as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and other people of gender and sexual minorities, immigrants, whether documented or not, disabled folks, and others. We continue to practice being good neighbors, to extend the love of our faith out to all people, remembering that all means all, remembering that some of our ancestors and many people have been resisting for over 500 years and still are able to find joy and health and life. Remember that we are meant to build bridges and tables, not walls, to lean into our values and use our creativity to lean into them, to dismantle broken systems, not put Band-Aids on them, remembering that the systems aren't broken from exploitation, but because they were designed that way. To love our children and youth and our elders with enthusiasm, to support those who are doing the work, to build on the work of those who have come before, doing our best for those who are to come. We are the future our ancestors dreamed of having. Every day we do our best, even when that just means making it another day when our lives are our resistance. Imagine more beautiful collaborations, partnerships, possibilities. To create something better, we can only bring it into being by first imagining it. Otherwise, we will keep getting what got us here. We must believe another world is possible and be committed to holding all of us in it. This is what love is asking us to do, to keep on loving boldly, as Emma's Revolution sings. May we be willing to answer the call.